our crew is ready to go. All right, should we get her going, or are we still, let's see. I think we got everybody from the board, board members. We waiting for anybody else, Scott?
No, sir, I think we're ready. We did, let's see. So Cammie, can you pull up the agenda, or can the public see the agenda? Cammie's gonna drive, sir, so, you know, as we get into backup documentation, it might take just a minute for her to click on it and bring it up. So our first item is obviously item 2.1. It's an action item R277-421, sir. So Chair, that's Ben Rasmussen. So if you call on Ben Rasmussen, Chair, we can get started on the first item, subject to your direction.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, absolutely. Let's go. And I know at the end here, we've got a lot to cover on budget. So yeah, let's tear into it. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. I appreciate you taking me first so that I can get to the other committee here. But R277-421 is a rule that's up for its 5-year review. There is one change that staff is proposing. Cammie, if you could show them lines 33 through 36. You may remember yesterday, the board approved some out-of-state tuition reimbursement for Box Elder County. Staff is recommending that you update the process to allow staff to make those approvals, given the nature of those. Dale Frost, I believe, is prepared to talk about the reasoning if you have questions about that. But beyond that, the rule just needs to be continued. So the staff request is that you continue the rule with that, with those changes that you can see there on 33 through 36.
Any comments, questions from board members?
Just to
Oh yeah, Molly, Kristen.
just to answer questions, could we have Mr. Frost just give us the 30,000 foot view on why we would want to do that?
Chair, if I may answer.
Please.
Good morning. Member Hart, as we were discussing whether any amendments need to be made to this rule, the suggestion was that since there really are no policy decisions, the calculations themselves are dictated in statute and rule, and we reimburse what's not covered by those calculations. And so it seemed to be an unnecessary step that the board have to review and approve that.
Thank you.
Member Norton, Kristen.
Yes, that just saved me from having to ask a follow-up question. So that was my first question. My second or follow-up question would be, how does this compare with states that we pay out of state to? And how does our rule compare to maybe surrounding states? Do you have any information on that?
Chair, if I may answer, Member Norton, I do not have that information. We'd have to look at the contracts. The contracts are with districts in northern Arizona and southern Idaho. And those are the two districts, Box Elder and Kane, that have these out-of-state students. And I'd have to look into that and compare.
So, and maybe to make that even a little easier, could we just compare it to what we pay for our students that might be attending in another state, similar to what those students are doing here?
Is that for Dale?
Yes.
And I can answer that, Chair. It looks like Chair Huntsman has his hand up as well. Chair Huntsman, would you like me to answer that first?
Excuse me. Yes, Chair, can I add to this a little bit? So, excuse me. I'm gonna lose my voice. I don't know why. Maybe I talked too much yesterday. Just for your situational awareness, these districts that border other states, for an example, Miller District, where that's where I served for 8 years. We had a interlocal kind of agreement between a Nevada district and ours. And so within that agreement, the state of Nevada was actually educating some of our students, and we were educating some of theirs. And each state kind of got their own little unique rule in how you transfer those funds. So it's, in this case here, in Box Elder, they're another one of those districts that border. But my understanding, and I could be corrected by somebody that has a lot other knowledge, without those agreements in place, and I don't know of any state approval that's required. We're just required to have those agreements. We were required to have those agreements in place. We couldn't exchange dollars. And so I think in Box Elders, this is just part of the process to exchange state dollars between, I guess, states, but really it's centered around those agreements that are in place. Is that helpful at all?
Yes, it is. I wondered if there was some kind of a way that, we, in some situations, if we had basically a wash. So that's what I was wondering. Thank you.
And just as a follow-up, we were required annually to update the agreements. So we actually, just as an FYI, the WPU that like WPU that the state of Nevada had was a lot more generous than what we had in the state of Utah, and we welcomely received that money, and then they understood where we were at on our dollars going over to them. But that's what we had to do.
Thank you.
And Chair, if I may add to that, my experience in the state of Arizona, because I don't know the specifics about these, that's generally the case, that whatever a state generates through their funding formula, it's kind of an exchange wherever the student is residing. And some of the specifics on these calculations, so like the contracted total from Box Elder was 101,468, and this WPU calculation for Box Elder generated 52,760, and so that 48,707 was the difference, so that they could cover what they needed to pay to the out-of-state district. Kane, on the other hand, because they received NEST dollars, received more through the WPU than the contracted amount, so they're able to cover that contract. That's why there's no reimbursement for Kane in this example.
Oh,
Dale, if I could ask a follow-up, the numbers we saw yesterday, are those sort of typical year to year? Is that kind of the range of, the amounts we're typically talking about?
I don't know that, but I do know that in the NEST program, there's 200,000 set aside. So that's kind of the cap. So I assume that we never get close to that, if that can kind of answer your question. My guess is it's somewhere below, it's not millions, it's a few tens or maybe 100,000 in a high year, something like that.
Got it. Okay. Any additional questions, comments? Looking for a motion if anybody would like to bring one.
I will. I move that the committee continue and approve R 277-421 draft one on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading.
All right. I forget, like flipping back and forth. We don't need a second, correct?
no second.
No second. Members, please vote.
Well, see if you have any discussion.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right. Go back to discussion. Any further discussion of the motion?
Seeing none.
All right. Seeing none, please vote.
We voting with our hands or with our voice?
Should we do the
Voice.
The old
So-
online, or do you guys want to go by
Yeah.
voice?
Voice is good, but if you're gonna do a voice, just you call out your eyes or
Yeah, all right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed by no? Motion is unanimous. That motion passes.
Perfect.
I forgot who's capturing our votes. Is that Cami?
Is who?
Do I need to
Yeah.
capture those?
I got them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cami. Okay, item number 2, moving on, an information item, progress achievements and achievements or improvements, focusing on the USIMS program. Who's driving this one?
Hey, Chair, this is Jared Felt, USB EIT Director.
Thanks, Jared.
I'm gonna just turn it over to Katrina Brinkley. If that's okay with you, she's the
Thank you,
program
yeah.
manager for USIMS, and she'll speak to the slides. Katrina?
Great.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Katrina Brinkley, Chief Product Owner and Program Manager for USIMS. I'm going to go quickly because I know you guys have a lot to cover on budget later. So Cami, if we could scroll down just one more. Thank you. This is just a slide on the USIMS initiative. I think everyone hopefully is familiar with what we're doing with USIMS right now. We're striving to replace some systems and create something new and all-encompassing that will help everybody, from educators to students to those at the board and our board members. Next slide, please. Our organization is still the same as it was last time I gave this update. We have a focused working group, we have a functional advisory board, we have development teams. We're all working together on the same things. If I'm going too fast, please feel free to jump in. I can't see any hands at the moment. So next slide, please. This is our roadmap. Currently, we are working on 3 things. We've got 2 teams up and running, the educator domain known as Team, and the student data domain known as Wizards. And those teams right now are both working on Kubernetes, which is a fancy way of saying a new release process that will allow us to release faster and more consistently. They're also working on individual pieces within their domains. So the educator team is working on their Utah interactive consumption or subsumption, excuse me, with educator ethics review. And the student team is working on multiple domain support for the login. This, you'll notice if you go to log into USIMS, has changed a little bit from being branded as Educate to being branded as USIMS. And you can see here the upcoming things. We did get a new student data product owner this last week, month, however you want to say it. So there are some changes coming in the roadmap just as we get her onboarded. We're super excited to have Jennifer Yates as the product owner. She's been working with USBE for quite a while now in multiple domains and areas. And we're excited to have her expertise with us for USIMS. Any questions on the roadmap before I continue?
Hey, Katrina, this is Jared.
Yeah.
Could you explain the roadmap layout? We've changed that.
Yeah.
So the completed work is actually not all encompassing. It's from when, and Katrina, I'll let you discuss that.
Yeah, so you'll notice that the completed work down here, there's not too much. We've left that as just the most recent completed work. And Jared has pointed out that I really should put recent completed work on there. This is just covering the last few things that we have created. So there's obviously more in USIMS, and we can cover that in the releases further down.
Would it be possible for another deck just for answering questions? You guys know everybody's excited about this, and that might be helpful just for us to be able to explain what's already in there. I mean, we had a release last month. I forgot the full extent of that release. Could you 10-second remind me?
Yeah, I actually have a slide later on.
Oh, is
that
it? I'm
talks
sorry,
about all of the
okay.
releases. No, you're fine.
Great.
Is that
I just
all
wanted to
right?
make sure we were up to date so we could explain to constituents what's already live and going. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions on this one?
Chair, this is Mark, it might be better to get through the presentation because there's a lot of really fun stuff a little bit later on informational. So I
Sounds good.
know my mind's anxious to get into those other slides too.
Okay. All right, and then next slide, please. This is just a quick status update and talking about some of the issues and risks that we're dealing with. As I mentioned, student team and educator team are both working on Kubernetes right now, which will enable faster, more standardized deployments that don't require manual intervention. We did have a little bit of a setback on the finance team. We submitted, or we sent out an offer that was accepted, and then the day before that person was meant to start, they actually found a different position that was permanent, full remote, and it's just something that we couldn't compete with. So we are in the middle of looking for a new product owner for that finance team. But we will be working on completing all of that hiring by the end of this month. Cross our fingers. As long as things go well, we have open positions for both product owner and software developer at the moment. And then our next steps, as I mentioned, we're hiring more developers. We did lose one developer this last month in USIMS on the educator team. We lost the month before that, we lost our automation engineer. And we still have not replaced a DevOps engineer that we lost late last year. So we're working on replacing these positions. So we will have open developers, open automation engineers, and open DevOps engineers. And we'll continue to work on the roadmap. As you can see on the issues and risks, we're still working on documenting those USBE processes and rules. We recently had AEM reach out to see if they could help us on some of that documentation. We may be taking them up on their offer to just start documenting things a little bit ahead of where we're going with USIMS so that we can consume some of that documentation that they're already working on.
And Katrina, could you hit on who AEM is and what they're currently doing for USB?
That's a good question, Jared. I feel like you know the answer better than I do. They're documenting some processes right now for students' data for the privacy office for David Slay and Whitney, whose name I have forgotten. But they're working on some of the process documentation there. So we might be able to take advantage of some of it.
And Chair, if it's okay, I'd like to just add to what Katrina said. So as far as the turnover goes, Katrina has mentioned that we've lost 4 people in USIMS, and this is coming as it's a bigger picture in IT general and throughout the agency. We've lost 14 people over the last year in IT alone, and it's starting to trickle into our USIMS teams as well, as far as people leaving to the private sector for higher pay and better benefits. And so we'll be, the board, we've been working with finance on business case, so you'll see that coming through. But I just wanted to point that out, that it is one of our big risks right now, is just keeping qualified staff on payroll. So Katrina, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Jared. And as he mentioned, we are working on hiring like mad. We're working on revamping some of our processes and really training people on Agile and working on documenting those business processes. If we could go to the next slide, please. You can see financials here. I have removed the 2018 Cactus funding as it has been expended, and it was expended since, I don't remember the exact date. I believe it's somewhere around May. And I can get that information for you if you need it. But if we can go to the next slide, we're doing quite well on our funding. We're still a little bit under budget, honestly. As soon as hiring gets back up on board, I think we'll be right on track to get things up and get things finished in time. Cross our fingers. Next slide, please, is the exciting one. Here's all of our releases that we've had recently. We've created the website, the login to USIMS, which is usims.schools.utah.gov. You are welcome to log in and pretend to be an educator and go do some background check requesting. We also have a new site for sharing information. That's schools.utah.gov/USIMS. That's where we'll be posting information about the roadmap. We'll try to keep that up to date with some of our sprint reviews. And we've also linked to our new YouTube channel, which we've created to share demos and reviews and any other news. We'll put our functional advisory board and our focus working group recordings on there so that they're publicly available whenever you'd like to review them or whenever you get a chance. And as you'll see, all educators may now use USIMS to begin their checklist. We've got the institutions included, their middle name, gender, race, ethnicity, and we are working on, well, actually, no, that is released now, the new portal experience I mentioned. We've removed the educate so that it can be a global USIMS login, because we hopefully will have some student data login information coming up soon. The student data team is working on a student search feature that will connect to current system SSID, which is the student identifier, so that they'll be able to use USIMS to start searching for students.
Katrina, would you mind just walking through like what that means for an educator right now? Like who they can go in and do what? I know you kind of explained that, but just from an educator standpoint.
Yeah, so an educator can log into usims.schools.utah.gov and they can go into their background check process. They can go in and enter information. They can query Cactus to find out if they have a Cactus record already. If they do not have a Cactus record, we can create one and send that on over, and they can start their background check, start requesting that information.
Cool.
Sorry, losing my voice. All right, now this is your chance to ask any questions. We've got our upcoming events here. You'll see we've got the educator focus working group and sprint reviews. We've got the student focus working group and the sprint review, which is actually included into the focus working group. And they have recently, the student team has changed their focus working group to be every other Monday instead of every Monday. And that means that every focus working group will get a sprint review as well. We did have a functional advisory board meeting on the 24th of August. We are working on getting that uploaded to YouTube so that everybody can review it. So
Wonderful. Chair, see a hand up, and oh, I'm sorry. Member Norton, too.
I think Member Norton, I just have a question and comment, but Member Norton was ahead of me.
That's fine. I was just wondering if you could take it one step further when you were talking about, and I realize this is selfish, but since we have 3 educators on this board, 4 educators, when they sign in, you talked about what they could do with their own record. What will be the capabilities in the future? I know you mentioned there's going to be some tie-in to student records. What else, or what would that entail, and what other things can we expect for educators?
yeah, so for educators, the team is currently working on the ethics review to be able to fill out your ethics review within USIMS. We're working closely with Ben Rasmussen on that as well. And that will be coming up shortly as soon as this Kubernetes stuff is finished. I think that's going to take about another sprint, so another 2 weeks. And then we'll be working on the ethics review. So that'll be coming shortly after that. For integration with the student data, we're currently working on the user experience of how a user will log in, and depending upon what access they are provided. And we're not quite sure how that access is going to be provided yet. We're still exploring. But depending on what access the user has when they log in, they may be able to go over and search for a student, like if they have a registrar access or something of that level, that they would be able to go over and actually search for a student with the same USIMS login. Right now, there are different logins. Obviously, you have your Cactus, your Utah Interactive, and your SSID. So with this, they would be able to do the student search, their educator ethics review, and their background check, all within USIMS.
Thank you.
Chair, did you have another?
Yeah, I think we're going to talk a little bit here in the next, it was some case studies and some legislative ask and more meetings about what's happening in the IT world. But I'm curious on some possible solutions. Before I ask the question, there's just some background. There's a infrastructure crisis happening all over in the United States. And when we think infrastructure, we always think roads, bridges, there's not enough lanes on the freeway, and then our water systems, and with all this flooding, now we think sewer systems because they can't handle all the flooding. It's like, but we as a people, we have this desire and a need for things to be simple and dependable and always there and et cetera. But this infrastructure I'm talking about is in the IT world. And on the private side, it is chaos. It is crazy out there. And it's affecting USBE. It's really has an effect on this particular project, and not so much on dollars, but dollars will matter, but just on our timeline on this project, there's significant turnover happening everywhere in this space. The solutions that I'm seeing on the private sector and even in my own company, as we're doing something like USIMS, but it's time about every 6 to 8 years, we've got to redo all of our systems, especially with growth. And some of the old systems are antiquated, and you get held hostage in trying to keep it maintained. But this is all not new news to the conversation. But my question is to Jared, if it's okay, Chair Moss, is in the space of solutions to get this infrastructure, to get this system up and going, we have been using people, individual technicians, which loyalty, I mean, they're being sought after at $10, $20, $30,000 more a year, sometimes greater than that, with lots of perks, big 4-screen stuff delivered to your house, work from your home. You only have to go into a Teams meeting only a couple times, not into an office, but into the meetings a couple times a week, and they live in a space of leave me alone and I'm going to get my work done. And it's they don't have the commute costs. They get to be in their sanctuary and work in that environment. So in the private sector, we're seeing more and more of backfilling that, not the full project, but pieces of projects going out to consultants, because the consultants have enough bandwidth within their team to take on projects. They don't have to have the whole project, but they can take a slice of the project. I see that trend happening everywhere in the United States in the private. So my question is, that's the background to Jared and Scott, or whoever wants to answer this, is are we entertaining as a solution to having our own employees a team approach for some of these bits and pieces as we build, as you build USIMS? That is my question.
Yeah, Chair, it's okay. I'll answer the first part. Scott can jump in. Yeah, that's something that we've thought about and are currently thinking about. The challenge with being a state entity is we have to, for the procurement part, we have to go out to RFP. And that requires all of the requirements for that piece that we want somebody to work on to be fleshed out and done. And the challenge with USIMS is we're taking 28 different systems and we don't know all of the requirements. One of the risks in the quad chart was USBE doesn't have great documentation for all their processes and things like that. So part of the functional working groups, there's big discussions in there with the educators, LEA data people, and our own teams to decide what those requirements are, how we want to re-envision those processes. So to be able to take and go out to RFP, we would have to identify a piece that we'd want to work on. put it out there, and then that whole, with all the requirements for a company to bid on, and that whole process takes 30, 60 days, and then to ramp them up on the development process. So it is a valid option, but it's really a challenge as far as time goes to make that happen. Scott, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Chair, if I may.
Please.
So yeah, I echo Jared's sentiments. Before I left to do my tour with the military, we also had talked about the exactly, without going back through it again, Chair Huntsman, that is a solution. He's spot on about, the time and effort it takes, and for the good of the group and for the way forward too. And we wouldn't do this any other way than without the board's approval. I think we need to seriously look at maybe an extension. Right now, the mark on the wall by the law is that USIMS will be fully operational capability across all three of the modules on July 1st, 2023. So for, state fiscal year 2024. As we get in and approach to the legislative session, given what we've discussed here today, everybody sees the market pressures. We call them market pressures in the military, as far as being able to recruit and retain quality individuals. A outsourcing or contracting solution is a way forward. However, time is always the enemy in this case. And where, we've experienced such volatility with personnel, both, internally, even outside of USIMS, and then within USIMS itself. I think it's better served if we, the whole process is better served in the system, is if we take a serious look at it and possibly asking the legislature with the board's approval to extend the timeline. That way, to Jared's point about how long it takes to outsource, or, for lack of a better term, the contract service and support centric to USIMS, it gives us that time that we desperately need, or will desperately need, to ensure that we get to what right is. It's not a funding problem. We're well under budget. It's just a time and personnel problem. So thank you for letting me add that, subject to your questions.
Hey, can I have a follow-up, Chair? Yeah.
Yes.
So with that said, Superintendent Jones, I understand the challenges on the procurement side, and we can't, I'm sure our state agency is any different than the rest of them. And I'm wondering, in the space of IT systems and that, of course, you know what we've had on our accountability system nightmare. Maybe there's something we need to change or make a request to change something in statute on procurement that we can deal with it. This system, or this challenge that we have, and it's a infrastructure nightmare right now that everyone's facing, is probably warrants maybe some of that dialogue of how do we get there, because I don't think we're the only, I don't think we're alone in the challenge on system and IT support. But we're not the only ones in this position, but it's about coming up with solutions. When we look at timelines and deadlines, for an example, I can't order vehicles. I can't get any dealer that you can possibly think of that can take care of my stuff to confirm that I can get 30, 40, 50 vehicles in an order, because the infrastructure that is in place to build those vehicles has issues. And it's just, and part of it's IT, believe it or not, in how to and what to in manufacturing. So this is a pretty big, I think, I'm not saying the sky is falling, but I think over the next couple of years, we're going to see some pretty significant system failures because they can't keep, the systems can't stay caught up with demand and or on the maintenance side. So I just throw that out too for some consideration, maybe as a committee of seeing what we can do to change those procurement challenges. You know, years ago, it was really difficult for a municipality to buy tires or gasoline, or because of procurement challenges, and over time and working with the legislature, they've changed that. So I'm not sure if it's worth the dialogue.
Is that something we might request, Scott, is maybe, a bulletin on what changes might free this up, make it easier? I have another question, a related question. I'm over on Talent Ready Utah, or whatever the new name is. We're talking about K-16 integration and work-based learning and this kind of stuff. Are we able to tap in either for kind of backup, or maybe for some of the more short-term, just kind of crank it out needs to our universities? Do we have the ability to tap into college kids who are studying this stuff, and they work cheaper than us grown-ups? They typically stay in place at a university for 8 months, and I know they're always looking for interesting projects. This is pretty important project. Is that a possibility, or has that already been explored?
Yes, Chair, yeah, definite possibility. So I can get offline with Jared and develop that a little bit further and come back to you on that. So would that work?
Yeah, terrific. I'm just thinking back when I grew up in Orem, and these two computer science professors developed this thing called WordPerfect over there, and suddenly North Orem exploded, and college kids were, doing all kinds of interesting computer stuff. And that's been a long time, but I know these kids are thirsty and they work cheap and they're smart. So I wonder if that's an option to weave in some part of this.
Yeah, I think that's a good possibility. So let me check on that. I mean, obviously we want to make sure that, legally and all that we're covered, but yeah, that's a good idea, sir. So let me come back to that as a request for data and information for next meeting.
Okay. I know an employment attorney that could take a look at it if we need. That's my day job for the rest of. Okay, moving on. Thank you.
Sir,
that one, Katrina?
Board member Norton has her hand raised. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. Kristen.
That's okay. I just wanted to add on to what you just said, and not only, reaching out to the universities, which I think is just a fabulous idea, because we could throw a few other big companies in that same group that went through that same plan, but also reaching out, into legislature and see if there isn't some kind of a temporary or even permanent workaround to the procurement, problem, and see if we can't, shorten that timeline, that we don't have to go through the full RFP process or some other way to get, these bit piece employees in place. So that's just another thought.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Was that it on that one then, Katrina? We cover everything?
Yeah, Chair, that concludes the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Jared and Katrina. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, item 3, internal services fee.
Sir, that's Chair, that's my item.
Okay.
And just real quickly, it is an information item, and I do want to call out that this is a fiscal year 2023 impact. So, and I also want to distinguish between the ISF and the ICP. Okay, the ISF, or Internal Services Fee Fund, is what we pay into, what the board pays into for particular support from external sources. For example, the HRM, state travel, state fleet. So we contribute, if you will, to a pool of money, which is titled the ISF, which is different than that term you hear as ICP, which is internal to us, the indirect cost pool to do it. So the so what of this information item is that in the past, board members have been concerned about what we're paying for services from, other state agencies like DHRM. And hey, are we getting a good investment for the buck? Sorry about the dogs. So anyway, what we want to do is ensure that as we get into the legislative session, you're all familiar with the ISF. And I mean, this is unbelievable. They didn't do this until just now. So this kid did this right. So anyway, as we get into the legislative session, I want to make sure that board members, or especially finance committee members, have situational awareness on the ISF and what we're looking at as increases to what we have to pay into the fund. So for the services that we get. Also, we're going to spend a little bit of time, just a short time today, getting information on the risk management increases that we'll see, but especially affect districts or LEAs, both districts and charter schools. I want to make you aware of those as well, because it affects obviously districts and charter schools within your districts, or within your areas of operation, if you will, or what your representation. So with that, what we provided to you was a quick summary of what Utah Department of Government and Operations is going to provide to, hang on just a sec, I'll be right back.
They're happy to see him home.
Yeah, no doubt. It's interesting just scanning through this while we're waiting for Scott. Cyber insurance premiums up 50%. I think we've all kind of seen what's driving that, what the exposure is out there. No significant cyber breach losses, though. That's very nice.
Yeah.
Hey,
sorry about that, Chair.
No, thanks, Scott.
We have a stray dog that ran into our house, so I can't believe this. So unbelievable. But anyway, so this is the summary. So what I'd like to do is, if we could just scroll down to Division of Human Resource Management as an example. This is basically provides you the information on how it's the methodology of the calculation on, it's an FTE based calculation on and how they come up with the funds that we'll have to pay for services from DHRM. The amount that we're going to have to pay, or subject to it passing and it going into effect for state fiscal year 23, the amount that we're going to have to pay is or will increase. What it does mean to us and other agencies, though, across the state is they're going to increase some of the positions. DHRM had to absorb the COLA increases to their own staff. They've done that over the last 2 years and basically without increasing the rates. The last rate change we had was for fiscal year 2019, I believe. And Deborah can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. But essentially, this is just for your situational awareness so that you can see that, and then subject to further development, you can see that we're getting a good ROI from DHRM for what we pay. And for what the services that they provide to us. There's the core payroll services, and then of course a generic or overriding HR services. Next, if you'll scroll down a little bit further. I made that point of DHRM having absorbed the COLAs. And so if we go to the Division of Purchasing and General Services, it provides background on the fees that are assessed. I don't see much impact in this area. Again, you as the board have your own procurement division or branch that is run by Mr. Christensen, by Zach Christensen. And then if we could scroll down a little bit further to the Division of Risk Management, you're going to see, we will see statewide decreases in the workman's compensation. However, if you scroll a little bit further, it's the liability premiums that are expected to decrease as well. Although we're getting, and we'll go into this other presentation that I know wasn't put into your backups, but we'll make sure you get it. Because again, at this point, this is just first look, first preview, so that as we get into the legislative session, you have an initial look at this. Then there's Division of Fleet Operations. If you can scroll down a little bit further. And there's DTS. Now we have our own in-house IT services, so we don't do anything with DTS at this point. And if you can just skip to page number 4, there we go, and go down to the Division of Finance. There's P-card services and the travel program. We met with the Division of Finance lead, that's Janica. She provided us with what we needed to know as how group rates with the travel program are being redefined. USBE typically doesn't send large groups out, so I'd see little or no impact to our travel rates. And Cami, if you could go to the risk management slides, because I do want to just spend a little bit of quality time on those, and especially call out or draw out for your situational awareness what's being affected by rate changes for risk management, both at our level and the district and charter school level. So Cami, if you'll just jump right to slide 7. Now, again, we'll get this out to you. There's no action item or determination here, but I just really wanted to make sure we provided time here today, so that, again, if we get into the legislative session, you have situational awareness of what's going on with the ISF. So if you'll jump to slide 7. Yeah, there you go. So here's the liability premium projections. Now, again, these are projections because they have to be approved, for fiscal year 2023, and that all takes place as part of the legislative session process. So I want to call specific attention to, while charter schools are looking at a per charter school decrease of $124.17, school districts are looking at a school district increase of $909.69. The reasons behind this are, situations or, accidents that have happened in the past where, the pool is affected. So if a particular district incurs bus accidents, situations like that, well, those of us who are familiar with insurance premiums and insurance pools, this is what typically does happen. There's adjustments or changes or increase to the premiums to absorb the risk or to potentially meet the risk. And as you all know, Utah has grown quite considerably. Census data indicates that over the last decade, Utah grew by, I think it was 18%. So that means more cars, more people are on the road. There's an increase in risk. If you'll scroll to, and we're part of the state agencies. So our premium will go up by $1,453.58. So we'll pay, if that's that $1,453.58, if it goes through, these are projections again, that'll increase to us. We're fine. We can absorb that. We can pay that. We have the money. If you'll scroll down a little bit further, Cami, I believe it's slide 10. These are property premiums, okay? And this is really where it goes up for everybody. Charter schools are affected, higher education is affected. These are your buildings liabilities, the risk pool along those lines. And actually, I should clarify here. I believe, and Deborah, you can jump in here as well, that this is actually where a lot of the property is affected, like transportation wise, like buses and things like that. I just want to make sure I'm clear on that as well. There's the liability premiums, if people get sued. Obviously, as an example that was given to us, there was the recent settlement with the University of Utah and the McCluskey issue or situation that occurred there. That's more along the lines of liability. It's here in property that we're talking about school bus liability and building liability or, things like that. So charter schools, each charter school, $88.58 projection per charter school. Then there's the school districts are looking at significant increase per school district of $2,765.66. And then our premium as well as, again, you or us as USBE are labeled a state agency at 1,332. And I think yeah, that's a digit error. I think it's meant to be 1,322 and 53 cents. Minus the zero there. Obviously, there's more information within these slides, and we'll get those out to you. And I just want to make sure, very clear, this is an information item. These are projected changes in both liability and property premium projections. And hopefully I corrected myself on the difference between liability versus property premiums. With that, I'll pause here for questions because I believe I see Board Member Norton's hand raised.
Yeah.
Yes,
And-
yes.
and
And
Chair as
Chair
well.
Huntsman now, sir. So I'll pause.
I just had a clarifying question. Up there at the top, above the blue bar where it's saying numbers in thousands, should that be there or not?
Above the blue bar, numbers in thousands. Let's see.
Yeah, right above
Yeah,
risk.
so that's just to let us know that, like in the premiums in FY22 were 9,323.75 for higher education. So it's in the thousands. I think that's what they're trying to let us know. Does that clarify?
Okay,
it?
I
Yeah,
was just more like, when I've seen that in the past, it would mean like on charter schools, that was $317,170,000. So I was just afraid, are we adding on 3 more zeros to that? Or is it really just $88 and not $88,000?
no, I think it's $88.58 per charter school. It's not $88,000 per charter school, ma'am.
I
So-
couldn't imagine that, but that's why I was
No,
wondering.
that's fine. No, that's a fair
Okay.
question. Yeah, I believe, and Deborah, do you concur with that? Is she on with us?
Yes,
Yeah,
I do concur.
yeah. That's a good question. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
that's what I think they were doing is calling that out. It's 9,323.75 is what higher education paid for premiums in 2022. And then they're projecting that higher education would pay 14,861.18 in, so like University of Utah, Dixie, Weber State, they make up higher education, so that's their premium is 14,861.18 for projected premium that goes through. So thank you for that.
Chair?
Chair Huntsman has his hand raised. Chair Moss.
Yeah, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. That's good information. The information as I'm reading it, it appears to be very informational, but it's almost reactive. It's FYI, this is what's coming down the pipeline, and here you go, and here's this reality of being a state agency. We live in that space with the DFCM and then all of other liability pools. But a question I have, and I'm not sure who can answer it. We're all part of a pool. Do we have a seat at any table that talks about risk mitigation, and to have some of these, instead of increase, what we need to be doing in our pool or as a group and or pool to manage these increases or to minimize them, I should say, and a proactive space. I mean, we can go to a meeting and watch what happens, but are we a participant at the table, I guess is my question.
Chair Moss. if I may answer
Yeah,
that
yes,
question.
please. And to second that, I noticed that some of the risk mitigation measures were part of what dropped the liability premiums by
Yes.
what, 12%? So
Right.
that seems to be working in that sphere.
Right. So the answer is yes. So Chair Moss, to answer Chair Huntsman's question, the answer is yes, we have a seat at the table, but let me describe those seats. So I represent the Utah State Board of Education with risk management, any meetings that occur, any, types of work groups to, address risk mitigation, either from a liability or a property premium standpoint. I am also a member of the rate setting committee, which, is essential to ensuring that, again, we do have a seat at the table. So where there are concerns or issues with, risk, whether it's on a liability or a property side, I have a seat at the table for the Utah State Board of Education, or we have a seat at the table and I'm your representative. The districts and the charter schools work directly with risk management. So I would say yes, the answer is yes, they have a seat at the table too. I don't necessarily, or your staff doesn't necessarily involve ourselves in, meetings for mitigation of risk at the district or charter school level. That's done pretty much one-to-one between the Office of Risk Management and the charter schools and districts themselves. Brian Nelson, he's the director of risk management, meets regularly with USSA, the districts. If it's a district that has, for example, when we were meeting to go over this together, he let us know that Alpine had reached out to him with their concerns or their questions about the premiums and where this is coming from. So the answer is yes, everyone has a seat at the table. It just differs in the sense that my role is more on the state agency level or USBE level, and then risk management works again directly with the particulars with the districts and or charter schools.
So
Chair Moss, does that answer Chair Huntsman's question?
I've got one
Harry,
follow-up.
you have a follow-up?
So with us being at the table, is there anything by being at the table, any initiatives or anything out there to do more of, do less of, that is coming from that group?
Not, so there'll be some meetings that are coming up here in the fall, and then of course before that, and I could come back to you with that. For the most part, we're very good about the liability and mitigation of risk, from like, say, for example, a personnel standpoint. We have very good policies and procedures in place to mitigate against the risk of liability along the lines of being sued or accused or what have you from and I'm just using an example. I'm not saying there's anything out there. We have those, but I'll be reviewing those with risk management in future iterations of those meetings. I did miss a couple of meetings. We did miss a couple of meetings because of my absence for my military duty. I believe the next one is in October, so I can follow back up with Chair Huntsman or with the Finance Committee on the outcomes of those meetings along this line, Chair Moss.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And I'm sorry if I missed this. I think you mentioned that while liability premiums are down, property premiums are up. The McCluskey stuff, that's liability, that type of thing. What is driving it? It's 60% higher ed, 30% elsewhere. And I'm sorry if I missed it, but what's driving that increase? What kind of claims are these?
So what we were told in the meeting to prepare for this briefing to you is, as it specifically relates to the property premiums, and especially within school districts, is even a few years back, several years back, there were some accidents. There was school bus accidents that if Deborah can confirm this for me, there was actually a loss of life. Child lost their life in an accident. So what's driving the property premiums is vehicular type bus accidents that have occurred in previous years. So Deborah has her hand raised, so she can clarify, correct me if I'm wrong.
It's also the biggest impact for this increase is the earthquake.
Oh,
Granite School District suffered a big building loss as far as that. And I believe there was also a fire in one of the districts. I just can't remember the district off the top of my head. That also had suffered some building loss there.
Yeah, there was a school that caught fire. No fatalities there. That's right.
It was in Canyons District, and a computer cart lit on fire and burned an entire floor.
Oh, wow.
Thank you.
Good catch. Deborah did, if I may, Chair Moss, that there was that 5.4 magnitude earthquake. And I think that what Brian told us was that there was around $70 million worth of damage. That number comes to mind. So.
Thank you. I'd forgotten. Yeah, that was 5 Armageddons ago. I've already forgotten how big and nasty that was.
Right.
All right. Thank you.
So more to follow on this. Again, it's informational purposes. I just want to make sure too that US Finance Committee members are well vetted or read into ISF versus ICP, because it will come up. It will, I would be surprised if you or other board members don't hear from your districts, about the increases in the premiums. I can't say enough though about the partnership and the excellent support we get from risk management, and then really from the state as a whole. DHRM, DFCM. We just really have Ken Hansen and I meet off and on throughout the years. Obviously, it got a little sidetracked with my being gone. But we really do. We have really good partnerships, and I can't say enough about how responsive they are and how great risk management is to us overall. So more to follow on this. So with that, sir, I'll conclude, and subject to any questions or concerns, we can move on to the next item.
All right, any further questions or comments? Okay, thank you. We'll move to number 5, action item, master legal requirements update and recommendation related to R277-108.
I think Angie's supposed to join, or I'm sorry, Deputy Superintendent Stallings is supposed to join us for this one. Is she on yet? Let's see. I'll make sure.
If not, should we pause and dig into some of the budget and come back to that, or do we want to check and see if she's? I know you're all triple duty right now.
Yeah, Chair Moss, if I may, this is Darren Nielsen, Assistant Superintendent of Student Learning. I'm also prepared to speak to this
Thank you.
topic.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm here if you're waiting for me.
Oh,
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
Waiting for me for.
I think you're here in case we need your expertise,
Okay.
Michelle.
Okay, I will turn my thing off then.
Okay. Chair Moss, let me introduce this topic, or why this action item is here today in front of the Finance Committee. We need to take a short journey through the meadow to get to a little bit of context to help you understand what we're asking. R277-108, which is the rule that governs the annual assurance document that superintendents across our state and charter school directors are very familiar with, comes up for an annual review every year, typically in December or in January. That goes through the Standards and Assessment Committee usually, and Jeff Van Holten and myself have been the ones who've led those discussions and revisions over the last number of years. The Standards Assessment Committee, has been interested in reducing the length of that document. It started out as a 7-page list of assurances that was primarily focused on federal assurances. So the document is given each year in June. Superintendents read through that list and they verify that they are compliant with each of those legal requirements that we're asking them to assure to. That document has grown to 24 pages over a number of years. So the Standard Assessment Committee has been interested in looking at ways to revise that. As you can imagine, they're a little frustrated that we continue to struggle with how to make meaningful changes to that rule. The purpose statement in R277-108 is what Chair Hansen has asked us to focus on at our most recent meetings with that committee. The current purpose statement is the purpose of this rule is to provide local school boards with a list of laws requiring local school board action and a means of assuring that local boards are in compliance. There's some challenges with that law, and I'm grateful that Michelle has joined us because she's also been engaged in the discussions with the Standards and Assessment Committee. This rule has also been discussed in Audit Committee over the last 18 months. And we're coming to you today because of the challenge that we have as staff of providing schools a list of laws requiring school board action. We propose that when we get back to the review of R277-108 Standards Assessment Committee, we are going to propose to them as staff that we change the definition. Instead of a list of laws requiring local school board action, that it be changed to a list of laws that the State Board of Education has a legal obligation to notify LEAs for. In order to do that, we have to conduct a review of the legal requirements. Chief Audit Executive Debbie Davis has indicated that there's over 1,600 requirements. One of her emails, I think it is termed well over 1,600 requirements. So we don't currently have a list of all legal requirements. So if you're a superintendent or a charter school director, you can see that the challenge with being compliant with all of the legal requirements is very challenging, because you wouldn't be able to find all of those in one place. School governance is very complex in the legal world. So what you'll see at the very next agenda item, when you get to carry forward balances, you'll see a request from policy, some money that they're requesting be used for the purpose of hiring additional legal staff temporarily to help us review all of the legal requirements and create this list that then would be used to narrow the focus and scope of the annual assurance document. And that's our request today. Is that you would accept our interest in developing a master legal requirements list that then we'll use to refine the R277108 purpose of providing LEAs a list of legal obligations, which we have, the State Board of Education has a responsibility to notify LEAs of. And then I'm available for questions, and I'm grateful that Michelle Buse is here as well to address questions that you may have.
Thank you, Darren. Any questions or comments from board members? I'll ask one while we're, oh, Chair, there you go.
Oh, go ahead.
Chair, and then Member Hutchings, go ahead.
I've been tracking this a little bit, but one of my questions here is what's being proposed here is will be of great service to our LEAs. But one of the questions I have is, built into this, how do you keep it current? It requires really good maintenance, I guess, with somebody advocating to say, okay, what's happening with rules and or what's in statute, and it's like an annual change every year. Is there, and this would be a question for Darren, has there been talk about the maintenance side of it too? It's really great to create something and then it gets used and thrown on a, might be hopefully not put on a shelf, but how do we keep it current?
Yeah, Board Member Huntsman, that's a significant part of our discussions, and it's actually the explanation of why we don't currently have not only the State Board of Education, but the previous agenda item where we're talking about risk management. They have an interest as well in LEAs being aware of legal requirements and being compliant. We contacted them to see if they had the foundation of a legal requirements list, which they didn't. They're very interested in that work, but in our contact with them, they weren't willing to take that task on either. Part of that is, as you're aware, as this committee is aware and the public's aware, there are a significant number of laws that are passed annually related to public education, and that is a significant challenge that we have.
Can I do one follow-up?
Please.
So in this space of maintenance, other entities, I don't know of government entities, similar to what Vice Chair Moss was talking about, they'll use college students that are supervised, that constantly work through, well, there's QA/QC built into it, but assist in maybe this kind of research and or tracking. But I'm just throwing that out. I know that we need to do something, but it's that doing piece, that what's our best ROI on whatever we initiate, and then also keep the maintenance of effort in place with how we get that ROI.
I can speak to that if I am able.
Michelle, yeah.
We had that discussion and we decided that because education law is so complex that we needed someone who would have a broader knowledge of education to understand that they had to look beyond the 5300s in state statute, that they had to look at federal statute, they had to look at local statutes that have to do with the health department, that have to do with local building codes, that have to do with local fire codes. So there were so many different areas that are involved if the board were to take on something bigger than just those things in statute, that the board has been delegated the responsibility to follow up and monitor. So it kind of depends on what you decide as a board. If you decide to change the language of 108 so that it doesn't say, here's a list of all the laws that you need to follow, just here's a list of laws that the State Board of Education is responsible for monitoring. We do that smaller group. I think you could use like a law clerk. And we discussed that. But I don't think if you left it as the larger, provide a list of all of the legal requirements a school has to follow, that you would be able to use someone who doesn't have a broader education knowledge.
So can I follow up?
There it is.
So actually, I see this in the hands of Risk more than in our hands, because the more you dig and the more you produce on compliance side, whether you're talking any, not just state law, but you get into laws of of other jurisdictions, counties and cities, and before you know it's air quality, and where isn't this more, shouldn't Risk have some fingerprints on this also? I guess it's a question for Michelle.
May I answer, sir?
Please.
Yes, we felt that that was my concern as your legal counsel. When we looked at the assurances list, my concern is that if you as a board take on the responsibility to provide this, you're also providing yourselves liability. If you have an LEA who relies on your list and says, I didn't comply with this law because you said these were all the laws I had to comply with. And so that's why we're suggesting the language change and to go away from having this exhaustive list that schools misinterpret as being the list of all the laws, because it really isn't the list of all the laws. And instead, narrowing down the assurances document to only those things that the Board of Education is legally, statutorily responsible to monitor. So that is why we would like to narrow it down. And the ability to narrow it down would actually take some extensive legal research in and of itself. And so that's why the request for the remaining funding.
But just one last little follow-up, please.
Yeah.
So I still think this is an awful lot in the risk court here of doing that, or we do this work, and maybe you're proposing as you've used that we do this work and then take it to Risk and say, here's our piece. Is that what?
I could respond to that if that's okay.
Please.
Yes, we've talked to Risk, and I don't know whether we need to take it to Risk, but what we would like to do is narrow it down to have the assurances document be only those things that in statute it says the Board of Education shall monitor or shall assure that each district is doing this. So for example, as an example for you, there is a statute that says that every classroom in this public school system is supposed to display "In God We Trust." there is no obligation on the Board of Education to ensure that that happens, but it is on the assurances list. So we would want to take that off of the assurances list and say that is something that is the responsibility of the local governing board to make sure that they're aware of those laws that are in the local governing board section of the code. So we would want to reduce the assurances list is the big issue we're coming to you, instead of growing it to what the language of the rule says, that these are all the laws you're supposed to follow, to change the language of it and reduce it. And so it really, I don't know whether risk management would use it or not, because it would only be those things that the Board of Education is responsible to monitor. So I'm not sure how helpful that reduced list would be for risk management.
I've got to follow up, but I'm taking too much time out. Maybe the
Go
others.
ahead, Chair. No, while we're on it.
So with this said, there's this expectation out there that we're the mothership. We are there to assist in lots of ways the LEAs to be successful. And this actually, all of a sudden, we're separating ourselves from being that solution on the liability side and that. So an LEA, whether you're a charter, just a small charter school or a large district, all of a sudden has to someplace figure out how to have those assurances in place that we're in compliance. And so I'm sure we'll, as this moves forward, that we'll hear from said LEAs but I understand why this pursuit's there, because liability, and we don't have enough on our side to have those assurances in place unless we're somehow protected by a statute or something that we have that separation in a statute that says we're only liable for somehow limit our, this is a good attorney thing. How many attorneys? Well, Jim, we've got several here. It's all about liability anymore. People are either trying to dump it on you or people are trying to shed it, which is all a great conversation. But I feel like I'm being the fly in the ointment here, but there is an expectation out there that USBE is going to always give the very best guidance in whatever is happening operationally in schools. Sometimes it's not very well received and there's pushback, but this will be swinging that pendulum away from that space. So that's just my only concern, but I can see why it's important to have that separation or have that list prepared, all in the name of assurances and liability. That's just a concern I have. I don't have a solution.
Thanks. I see Stacy and Molly's hands up, but Kevin, were you going to respond to the chair's comments first? Kevin John? And I won't try to get your title like Cindy did. She's braver than me, but thank you for jumping in.
Yeah, I just wanted, so Kevin John, Deputy Auditor Executive for the Internal Audit Department for the State Board. I just wanted to provide a brief comment. So there is a limited criteria that may be germane to this conversation. FIAC 2020-2000 from the Division of Finance requires the State Board of Education to maintain an internal control system. Likewise, so does uniform guidance provided by the federal government. Part of internal control system, the second component is risk assessment. So one of the objectives of risk assessment is to identify your objectives and make sure that there's no risks that would prevent you from achieving your objectives. So in a government environment, many of our objectives are legislative mandates. So there is a requirement that we are identifying our legislative mandates. Those are our objectives and achieving those. Likewise, in R277113, the board's rule, you require LEAs to maintain an internal control system. And if they're receiving federal dollars as well, they likewise have a requirement to comply with uniform guidance and therefore a requirement to have an internal control system. So likewise, they should be identifying their objectives as well. And many of those objectives, again, in the government environment, are legislative and criteria-based objectives. So things they're being told to do, as opposed to things in a private sector that you would want to do. So what I'm pointing out is there is some legal requirements that surround this, that are germane to this conversation, that are requiring all parties to identify their legal requirements and ensuring that they're achieving those. And so that is the objective. That's the purpose of an internal control system. It's to make sure you know what your objectives are, you're mitigating risks that would stop you from achieving said objectives, and that you're documenting that in policy and procedure and monitoring that for compliance to information, communication, so on and so forth. So in short, yes, I mean, I think this is a great conversation, but be mindful that there are some requirements out there, and those are not just on the USBE, but likewise, the individual LEAs have those responsibilities to know their own individual objectives, that they can't wholly rely on the USBE to be provided that list of objectives. But I would defer to legal in case I did misspeak in anything, but that is my understanding.
Thank you. Stacy, Molly, I'm not sure who was up first.
It was Stacy.
Go ahead, Member Hutchings.
A couple of things. I first want to talk as having been in a position where I fill out these assurances every year for over 10 years. And I've seen the journey of some of these assurances in format and length. And I just want to say, in that experience, it's gotten better as far as the format in which they use. It's gotten a lot easier to fill out those assurances. It has gotten a lot longer, but I will say it's a really good reminder to me as a school leader when I fill those out to remember those things. I mean, it's at least on an annual basis. It also saves what could be a lot of other individual reports. It's all in one. And so as a school leader, I actually appreciate those assurances. I remember one year, speaking of the In God We Trust one, we moved offices during the year, and I was filling out the assurances and I'm like, oh, did that move to the new office? And I actually went and looked and, oh, yep, it did. So I, signed it off. And so in some ways, it's very helpful to me to kind of touch base at the end of the year is when they usually come out, to make sure we're in line in all those areas. With that said, I do understand in this seat as the board, we're looking out for, the liability of USBE, and that's important also. And so I think I like that we've been discussing that we feel an obligation to at least make sure that the schools are supported with some kind of a list. I would support that, even if we do modify our own list to, because of risk and liability, make sure that, our list are the things that are the responsibility of USBE. I would encourage us to make sure that somewhere the lists are created and available. It could be through the different associations. It could be through, just through risk, or, the different associations that exist, that we still maintain some kind of list, because I believe, and I appreciate what Kevin said about the LEA's individual responsibility, and he's totally accurate in that. But I also believe that the job of LEAs in schools is to instruct students. And every time we say the LEA needs to do this on the business side, and especially for the smaller schools, it takes a lot of time and effort and focus away from teaching kids when we're saying you need to make sure, every school maintains, this checklist and make sure it's up to date. I think there's some economy of scale where we can ask some of the associations or risk if we can no longer maintain such a list, that they could take on that obligation, and that we encourage and support that.
Thank you. Any response from our staff, or should we move to Member Hart and then come back for additional thoughts? Molly, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to bumble through the internal controls discussion. As a member of audit, we have been talking about that, but I'm just very thankful for Mr. Johns doing a much better job than I could have. I think we do need to spend some time on this idea of internal controls. I agree 100% with Stacy. I fill out those assurances, and the "In God We Trust" was an issue for our district because we had renovated a bunch of districts, and then all of a sudden we had to put in a big order for plaques, and that. But what Member Hutchins said was exactly right. We're supposed to be facing the students. And if we hear any message from our constituents right now, it's that we need to pay more attention to what's going on in the classrooms. And every single item that we put on the LEAs is an item in a different category. And so I agree. I don't want to be the fly in the ointment either. And I certainly don't want to accept liability more than we need to. But on the other hand, if we don't address these, it's almost like a hot potato, and we can't toss it off to somebody else because that just means our LEAs are having to absorb that liability, which in some cases completely understandable. But my vision is that USBE is a support for LEAs. And this is the exact kind of support they need in order to prevent. I see this as a prevention measure. And, I am one of the people that want a smaller government, a smaller, I want to do fewer things right than doing more things more spread out. But in this case, I think we do need to have more of an understanding of 1600 laws and I'm not saying that we would do all 1600. I think there's a medium somewhere in there. But I think it's just like fees. We think that it's a much simpler system than it actually is. And then when we actually dig in and find out how complex it's gotten, we're not really understanding what's happening in some of these spaces. So I really want to put a plug in for really diving deep into internal controls. And I really do want to find I'm not totally comfortable with limiting the scope that much. I'm also wondering if someone could answer the question number 4, should the annual assurance document be considered and identified as a compliance-oriented tool? What does that mean? What was that line of thought?
I saw Assistant Attorney General Michelle's Eustace hand up. Did you want to respond to part of that, or did somebody else want to respond to the question about number 4?
I think I can respond to the question number 4. I was in the meetings and we wondered whether it's something that we have an individual who tracks each of those compliance things and then have, a selected number that a monitoring goes out and double checks to see whether or not all 100 things on the assurance document are done. And may I make an additional comment?
Please.
Okay, I just wanted to say thank you. You helped me see a different perspective of it as school people. So the 3 of you board members who spoke have helped me to see a different perspective on this. I appreciate that very much. I just want to make sure that you understand that even though the rule says these are all the legal requirements, there are still other legal requirements that are not in that list. And so maybe we can word the rule a different way and you can find that middle ground. And I do appreciate that knowledge that you have brought forward to help me see things from a different light.
Can I follow up, Chair?
Please.
I meant to say that actually. I think that we can make that very clear to LEAs. And I think one of the items could be, have you revisited your own internal controls? And that could be, I don't know how that would be worded, but I very much hear that loud and clear. We can't put out something and give LEAs the false security that this might be all encompassing. They still do have responsibilities. The other point is that as we support charters and grow the charter movement, those are tiny LEAs, and they deserve as much clarity and as much support. If we support that type of school structure, then we have the responsibility to provide the tools to be successful. So that I wanted to make that point too. Thanks.
Thanks. Chair?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion if you'll accept one and then briefly speak to it.
Please do.
The motion is that the committee approve the creation of a master legal requirements list, including the SPAN plan to use carry forward funds totaling $200,000. And then if I may speak to it.
Of course.
This is money well spent that's going to help us with our situational awareness and not just ours, but LEAs, all of the stakeholders, including legislature and others. I'm anxious to see this. Hopefully the board will move forward on this and we get this work done. And then as we talk about next steps and proposed betterments of addressing risk and et cetera, I will be better informed. So, or we will be better informed as board members. So that's a motion.
Any discussion to the motion? Oh, Kristen.
Yes, I wanted to, I would agree with the motion. When I was going through this, I wrote down what's going to be best for kids. Ultimately, that's what we all want. And, there's the thought that taking our people away, whether that be in schools or whether that be on staff, away from their primary responsibilities, that might not be what's best for kids. And on the other side, who is best to advocate for our LEAs than we are? And then I think I love that thoughts here that we brought in and the associations, whether that be USSA or USBA or whatever, that this is really all of our responsibilities, and most definitely it's the LEA's responsibility. But I think that it is just vital that we help them. I just keep reflecting back at rural schools, listening to these superintendents who are principals, and they are teachers and they are coaches. And I think about them trying to have to do all of this, and they need our help. And I don't think that all has to come from our people at USBE, but I think that we do need to manage it and coordinate it and help it along. So I do agree with the motion that would be money well spent, and let's move it with it.
Thanks, Kristen. Deputy Superintendent Stallings.
Thank you, committee members. And I'm not sure how my video is appearing. My laptop is being used by the Law and Licensing Committee to display in the boardroom. Am I to the side or am I correct?
We can see you. There's just kind of oh, there we go. We got you.
Okay, great. I apologize. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't distracting. Deputy Superintendent of Policy, Angie Stallings. I just had one question based on this discussion. The motion is very broad at this point, and I wondered two things. I was not, just wanted to give the background, I wasn't involved in the discussions in the Standards and Assessment Committee or in the recommendation. That I wasn't part of the group that provided the recommendations. But as you can see, the recommendation is that I oversee this project and use the funding to contract with somebody to do that. And I'm happy to do that. I did hear three. It sounds like there are three ways to think about how we're narrowing or broadening this master legal requirements list. And I wondered if we wanted to make a recommendation on the scope of it, or if what you, and the reason why I think the scope is important is as I'm going to be looking either to enter into a contract through an RFP or hiring a time limited person, I'll need to know that scope. Are we looking at limiting this master legal requirements document to those items? for which USBE is explicitly required to notify or provide oversight of? Or are we wanting the larger, trying to come up with the all-encompassing, or somewhere in between?
Can I, if I can throw a quick comment in, I wonder, and I see some hands up, but I wonder whether, just throw this in the hopper, there might be a two-part response where we provide a somewhat guaranteed list of those rules for which we are required to provide oversight, and then a second list where we say, these are all the obligations out there, but we can't guarantee this, and you need to conduct your own review, or something to that effect, where we're helping, but we're not necessarily providing the level of assurance of that we are on the tighter list. I don't know if that would make sense, but as I hear both of these, I mean, especially from my experience on charter schools, on the board there, I mean, one, yes, they're small, and we're in the process of sorting through all the reporting requirements and assurances. I'd hate to prune that back and then dump this on them, where every one of them has to hire a lawyer to figure out how many of these 1,600 requirements apply to them. So if there's a hybrid of guarantee here and assistance there, that might be something to think about. I also have to think that before we start this from scratch, there's got to be an LEA out there that's got a pretty good handle on this. Maybe it's Alpine, maybe it's Wasatch, I don't know, but I hope we could at least start with something. And I assume we have something that we've been using. So hopefully this isn't a start from scratch, but start with what we have and then make sure it's, complete. So I guess my last, I had another question about the source of the rule and how long it's been in effect, but let me get the other hands up. I saw Chair with the follow-up, and Molly and Kristen as well. Whoever wants to jump, I'm sorry.
As the maker of the motion, Darren Nielsen did a fantastic job giving background and what is like next step. And I found included with my motion is almost like a step one. Let's first of all, let's identify on our side what we're requiring, and I think and what we need to require. And so we're looking at us first, and then there's all those other things that are out there that will make the could possibly change the list. So I've viewed it as a step process. And if you don't spend all $200,000 getting into the first step, then that's good. But I don't think you can, I don't see the water to the end of the roll of exactly Deputy Superintendent Stallings of exactly what we want to do at the very end. Let's get our house in order first of what those requirements were. And that's what I've heard. That's what's been talked about in the other committees. And what are those? And that the word most likely will be that it will be minimized. But then once we have that, then what's the next step? And I see future dialogue and discussion. That's just me as one member of the finance committee and also the maker of the motion.
Thanks, Chair. Kristen and Molly.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say as well. And I concur with both what you said, Chair Moss and Chair Huntsman. Yeah, we need to take care of our portion and do a great job with that. And then we need to be a player at the table with the rest of these stakeholders. We're contributing our piece of the puzzle, and then, these other groups get together and fill in the blanks. Then I think we can manage that portion of it. And yet I think that it covers the needs of what the LEAs would need as well.
Thank you. Member Hart.
Yeah, I anticipate this needing more than $200,000 once you get into it. I don't want to be in a position where we find out about laws that we should be following in board meetings or from parents that tell us about our laws. And I want to minimize that kind of risk. And that's why the second part is important. I completely agree. Worry about first things first, but I don't think we should quickly discard that second part, even if it does take a larger commitment. It is more and more common for people to become very familiar with law and policy, and we need to stay on top of that. And our LEAs, most of all, need to have the resources to be able to stay on top of it as well. So I support the motion wholeheartedly. I also think we need to do quite a bit of work in the area of internal controls and really get a thorough understanding of that, because that will smooth out so many so many related issues, and just provide greater transparency, more resources to our LEAs, and hopefully also more transparency to our parents and communities. So I see it getting bigger, but start small.
Yeah, if I can make one last comment and go to the chair to sum up and put it to a vote. Having done some of this stuff, assigned paralegals, honestly, I can't see it requiring $200,000. When we did this ULEAD project, we had a kid who was in at UVU. He's now a grad student at Penn and going into ed policy. He cranked out a list of the requirements or the programs funded by the legislature in the last 20 years for which there was some expectation of a report and the status of whether that was being tracked. And it was not 1,600, but it was probably at least 300 or 400, and cranked it out pretty quick. It wasn't something we could take to the bank as a guarantee, but I guess what I'm saying is I can't imagine we've been flying blind on this. We have to have a pretty decent number of these that people are aware of. So I'm in favor of the motion. I hope that that's ample to get that first piece where we can say, these are the things we're responsible for. You can take this to the bank. And then we look at the larger piece that's a guidance that I think all think, but I hope maybe we can talk creatively about how to do that. But I hope it doesn't take a full 200,000 for an attorney to do that project. So those are my thoughts. And Tara, did you have a final comment?
Yeah, we know how to. Right now, we're establishing funding to get this work done, and a lot of times we don't use it, and so I trust our staff to meet the scope and report back to us of what the finding is, and then we can amend the scope, or it just puts it back in our court. But I appreciate the comments, so I think we're solid.
Well, sounds good. Any further comments? If not, we'll put to a vote. The motion is, as previously stated, that the committee approve creation of a master legal requirement list, including the spend plan to use carry forward funds totaling $200,000. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say no. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, thank you very much for
you guys
giving us all the background on that, Darren and everybody else. We've got budget. Should we take a 5-minute break, come back at just a few minutes past the hour and spend the next hour on the budget? All right, we'll come back at 5 minutes after the hour. Does that work? Okay. Okay, is everybody back with us? We only need another couple minutes. Let's give another couple minutes. We set to get back on? Anybody need a couple more minutes? Okay. Deputy Superintendent Jones, I believe you've got the next one and the rest of the schedule here, right?
Yes, Chair. Well, me and Assistant Superintendent Jacobson.
Gotcha.
So this is an
Thanks,
action
Trevor.
item. Each year, as I articulated yesterday to the full board, we go through year-end close processes. And each year, every year, we always result in carry forward balances. So if we could go to the backups now and just open those up. Two things I want to point out related to carry forward balances is this year in particular, there are higher carry forward balances internally to the office budget. We attribute that to, setting budgets for travel, conferences, trainings that just because of the COVID impact really just didn't occur. These are non-lapsing, meaning that we can carry forward these balances. Several years ago, the board, as pretty much our process goes, or rules go, it's not in a rule related to this, but what we bring forward to you as the finance committee is carry forward balances of state funding that's in excess of $100,000. So there are balances in other programs, but they're less than $100,000, and we don't bring those to you because of the multitude of balances, and as you know, how many programs we have. So if there's later on, if you want to look at that particular part of the process, which is that, we do bring you the balances in excess of $100,000. The process that Assistant Superintendent Jacobson takes is to engage with the respective section directors, with the deputies and/or the two other assistant superintendents, Nielsen and Voorhees, and make sure that they're an integral part of the process that leads ultimately to what we're doing here today, which is our respectful request that the Finance Committee make a recommendation to the board on allowing or approving us to proceed with the execution of these spend plans for these excess or carry forward balances. We do try to give you enough lead time as Finance Committee members to review them. We do encourage any questions or concerns with the plans. We are open to any kind of amendments to the plans or follow-up to any particular plan or any particular plan today that you might want us to do or bring back to you. We feel it's important that we're transparent and this is public facing. This process is public facing. The legislature has been very supportive of us in the past as far as carry forward balances go and not sweeping them. Although, you know, we did have carry forward balances swept due or related to the COVID situation. That was the first time that that's ever happened. But again, it's attributed to the fact that we were dealing with COVID and uncertainty with the budgets. And then that turned out to be fine because ultimately the legislature returned those carry forward balances to us. So, you know, the clarity though that we provide, you know, essentially to the public, to the legislature, to the governor's office, and more importantly to you by way of this process is to demonstrate just how much we track on a program accounting basis, dollar for dollar, the results of the year-end close process and these balances that are brought to you here today. So with that, we can, and we've done this a couple of different ways in the past with finance committees. We've gone through each spend plan individually. We just opened it up as we have done here. So the first one for your review is the assessment spend plan. And then for specific questions or technical or detailed questions, Chair, if you'll call on Assistant Superintendent Jacobson, I'm sure she can answer those. So first one up is the assessment carry forward balance and spend plan. Or actually, Chair, if we may, let's see if Deborah, or I'm sorry, Assistant Superintendent Jacobson has anything to add or see if I missed anything before we tee this off.
Thanks, Deborah.
Yeah, I think the one thing, just for context, and I don't know that if in our closing package yesterday, it actually shows that there's $186 million in carry forward. The part that's missing there is that about a little over 150 million of that is either obligated by contract, grants out to LEAs, or they're restricted as flow through to LEAs. So what you're seeing today is actually, at the end of the day, there was about $31 million that you'll see through these plans. Today, it's about 28 million that's here because you don't have financial ops. I haven't had a chance to do our own. That's a little over $1 million. And then of course, your own discretionary, which you briefly saw yesterday, your carry forward was 1.8 that we'll work through in October. So just as you see those large balances, that just gives some context.
Thank you.
For board
All
member,
right, I see a hand from Member Hutchins.
Yeah, just a quick couple of questions. I think trying to understand the concept since I haven't been through this process before. So what I'm understanding is a large part of this carryover is due because of lack of ability to spend some funds during COVID, which is understandable. About how much do you have a ballpark percent of how much is a result of COVID? Inability to spend funds? How much is normal? Maybe in a normal year, how much do we usually see?
For travel, well, there's several things. So there's the travel piece, conferences that USBE puts on, but there was also a lot of vacancy savings as well. And we haven't had a chance to calculate those out individually, but I can say that our carry forward this year is 30% higher than last year. So.
And then one more question. That's okay. Was there some general guidance given to department heads in making these spend plans, specifically because that's the carryover due to COVID hopefully won't reoccur at this rate? And so some guidance as far as how to spend the money this year that may not continue. So the general guidance to staff is always to look at a
a couple of things. One, what is the funding for? We should always focus on, are we spending that appropriately for that particular program? To address any needs, one-time needs for that particular program that we can utilize these funds for instead of going to the legislature and requesting money. Those are the main things that we ask them to really consider. Special projects maybe that they want to address in that particular program for the year. I'm trying to think of the other ones. But those are the main things that we have them really focus on.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, back to Deborah or back to Scott?
Yeah, so we can go through each of the proposed carry forward spend plans with the first section being assessment. Any questions or concerns about the assessment to achievement program? So, just to orient you to what's in front of you is if you look kind of towards the left, it's in bold, it's the section name, the units, what the program is, the program name, this is assessment to achievement. So if you have a question about, well, what is the program assessment to achievement? We have the assistant superintendents here, the section directors that can answer those types of questions for you as well. So this is obviously put together by our teaching and learning section, I believe, or
Assessment.
I'm sorry, from our assessment section. So it's the first one, it's the first spend plan for your review. Any questions or concerns with this one?
Chair?
Maybe it's a question for Scott Jones. Can you speak to the board? And I know this is a first for quite a few board members, and just I honestly thought we would be between 40 and 50% increase over last year because of COVID, because that's what you're seeing in all the past state agencies that I'm aware of, and a lot of it has to do with COVID, personnel, lack of personnel, but some agencies, unlike this agency, on the operational side, they spend with a purpose or they don't spend, where other entities hurry and spend it or they think they're going to lose it. But with that said, on the loss side, Superintendent Jones, can you speak to anything that we're moving forward as a carry forward of any risk that the legislature can still come in and sweep it?
So, sir, I'm not Chair Moss, if I may. So to answer Chair Huntsman's question, I don't see any high risk of the legislature coming in and sweeping this money at this point. And what I base that on is the fact that we're getting attention to the fact that even though there was the COVID impacts, our section did a pretty good job of making sure that funding was spent for the purpose it was legislated for or appropriated for. They're so good and adept at controlling their budgets that they didn't go out to spend money just to spend money. There's a high level of trust from the legislature on the USB and then our section directors along that line. I think there's a good and deep understanding about the fact of the impacts of COVID, and that given no one can predict what the future is going to be with these variants coming out and things like that, but for all intents and purposes, these plans that have been put in front of you today are what will also be put in front of the legislature, and they're very solid. Along the lines of the question that was asked of Assistant Superintendent Jacobson about what do we detail or what do we ask the section leaders to provide or to consider when they're putting the plans together, and that's essentially what was this money intended to do. And so these plans that you're seeing here today are along that line. Our directors are very good and adept at staying focused on what the funding was intended to do, and are putting these plans in front of you today along that line. So, sir, or Chair Moss, to answer Chair Huntsman's question in a short way, I see very little risk of these balances being swept, unless there's some you know, unpredicted or unforecasted impact of these variants, you know, that somehow affects the Utah economy, or, and we have to go back into the kind of situation we did where they had to bring the balances back until we really had a better idea about revenue. So that's my answer, Chair Moss, to Chair Huntsman's questions. Please let me know if I answered them.
Thank you, Chair. Any follow-up?
No, that was good. I just thought it'd be good for this group to know that teeny little risk, but it's mitigated by what we're doing today and forwarding onto the board on our accountability side, part of our cadence of accountability, that we're transparent and we recognize that is state's money and we are good with our spend plans, you know, and it's all in the public view. So thank you. I know it's a little bit of derail, but for some of us that have been here for a while, that it's always a little bit of a risk, but on the operational side, that's a risk taken because we, as an agency, the money doesn't get spent. It's got to be spent correctly, and with the goals and objectives of spend plans and what happens within their space of operations. Unlike some other things that say we got to hurry and fill warehouses up, or we got to do this or that because we're going to lose our money and we want to have our allocation next year. So there is a difference with this agency compared to others.
Sorry, I remember Hart's hand up. I'll just a brief comment. As I look through these, just to Deputy Superintendent Jones' point, you know, we don't see in here, well, gee, extra money, good time to stock up on crazy bells and whistles. Some of these, I look at the CTE, a pathway realignment project where you can take the opportunity to do something that will impact going forward without continuing spend. The charter board that I'm familiar with is looking at some catch-up measures to clean up some issues and do some short-term one-time funding of the type that I think, you know, a carry forward really fits and not go into something that will incur future obligations. So, I mean, at least those that I've looked at, it seems like a pretty strong case to be made that this is a really strategic and restrained use of these carryover funds, and, you know, being careful with tax dollars. Member Hart?
Yeah, so I looked at the recommended motion, and it just says to make recommendations to the board to approve the carry forward. I'm trying to figure out what the end game is really kind of here, because like looking at us at assessment, for instance, it says retain these funds for use in the A2A program to ensure that the board can cover responsibilities or obligations. That's I don't know. I don't know that that actually says a plan per se, as compared to the assessment where it says reserve these funds to help cover costs associated with long-term rise contract or cost options. Like, I understand, like, that's an actual plan. Like, I know there are cost options that we could choose to purchase. I'm just wondering how much specificity, how much detail these were needing to have. And then things like approved spend plans from the state charter board are still pending. I'm not sure what we're moving forward if we don't actually have the information. So I'm just wondering a little bit about our end game and what we're trying to do here. Or is it that this is an appropriate level of detail and this is what we should be expecting?
Scott, or who's that to? You want to answer that one?
Well, so the end game or the end state is for this committee to review these and ask these kind of questions and say, you know, if you don't feel like you have enough detail behind what, you know, we're proposing here, so, you know, we'll stay on the same first one. if the obligation detail isn't sufficient for you, you can take this one off, have us come back to you. The issue though, or the challenge with that is time, right? So if we have to come circle back to you with it, do it, because you could also make, change the motion to say, or basically caveat it, that, the board will approve the proposed spend plans, subject to staff providing, more detail on the use of assessment money. I mean, it's happened before. It's been, on a one each basis. The overall point of this process that we take is that prior to my coming on, and there was concerns with board members, both past, present, that there's not enough transparency of how we're spending the money that results in year-end close, balances. So again, I just defer back. If you or Chair Moss, if Finance Committee member or Board Member Hart doesn't feel like there's enough details, we can come back with those. We can come back and provide more in depth. That's why we do this. We do this so that you as a board member representing the public can feel like that staff here have identified to the level of detail necessary that, this money will go for not only its intended purpose, but for what the board's direction is in support of your strategic plan and portrait of a graduate. So yeah, I encourage that. If you don't feel like, you have enough details to move this forward, we can come back with those details. All I would ask though is that you try to guide us in what those details would consist of, right? What are you looking for? Because, at our level, at mine and Deborah's level, we're the bean counters basically, but program specifics are, and they're phenomenal. As you know, our assistants and our directors, I'm sure, can answer that and provide a more in-depth narrative. So Chair Moss, back to you to see if I answered Board Member Hart's questions.
Yeah, thank you. Molly, any
Chair,
follow-up?
yeah, I'm not inclined to question. I had to do the same thing with land trust dollars, and we had a lot of carryover at the school levels as well last year. I'm just the nuance of it. I having not done this, I want to make sure that we're meeting the expectations. I'm not inclined to question it. I just noticed a wide variety in the level of detail that was provided, and I just wanted to ask about that. So thank you. That does clarify quite a bit.
I see Deborah's hand up. If I could add maybe one piece to that, Member Hart's on the end game here. What's the timeline? Do we need to make a recommendation to the full board for approval by X date? Is this something, what's the setup there?
Well, so if I can jump in on that one, timing. So the year-end close process in itself. I mean, we're coming to you in September, which is basically the second month into the next fiscal year. So if these spend plans are not approved by the board in October, it would delay execution of these dollars even further. And I don't want to make this sound at all like a threat or like but hopefully I'm addressing your question. The timing of this is everything. Holding up on that, I'm not trying to unduly influence the process to say, well, hey, if you don't make a recommendation, and then the board doesn't approve them all in October, it's going to have second or third level effects on the ability to get this money out for the kids. It's a balancing act, right? We do our level best to get, this in front of you as quickly as we can. The timing of it though, if the board doesn't approve these based on your recommendations in October, we're looking at November before you've authorized, this money to go forward, if you will, or to be spent. And that could have second and third level effects on contract processes, delivery of particular resources to our LEAs. And again, I just want to make sure it's clear. I'm not threatening that or saying that, but it's the timing. It's really the timing of this. There have been cases and situations in the past where some of the spend plans or majority of them have gone through and we've had to circle back on some of them. That's why staff are here too, so that if you're feeling like you need to hold off on something because you need more information, they can better detail to you what the second and third level effects, both negative impacts of the timing behind it, depending on which one it is here. So does that answer your question, Chair Moss?
Member Hart, look, I see a head nod. It certainly answers mine. And so, yeah, thank you. Deborah.
Yeah, so and that's exactly what I wanted to bring up. So Scott pretty much covered that. The one thing on the charter schools that I will caveat on is the pending piece. It's pending on it going to the state charter school board. So this, because of the timing of sections being able to prepare these spend plans, sometimes are days before board backups are due for them to bring in September. Because, you know, we're still closing at the time for them to get their balances, make their plans. It's a very short timeline. So in that case, for charter schools, they do have a plan, but it has not had they haven't had the opportunity to take it to the state charter school board. So they have not approved the plan yet. So this is just their intent to take forward.
Right. If I may, Chair, to add on to that,
Yes.
the state charter school board, to my understanding, is meeting next week. And I believe this is on their agenda. So timing wise, by the time we get to our board meeting, if there was any issues or concerns, because we honor our state charter school board members, we honor their process and you know, their fiduciary responsibility to that funding. And so to Deborah's point, it's just the timing aspect of it, but my understanding is they're meeting next week.
And is this then the plan from staff? It just needs board approval and then audit visit? Is that what I'm hearing on the charter board piece?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
Oh, I think there was a visit needed. Is it also approval by the charter board of the spend plan that came from staff next week? And then, Deborah, did you say also a visit from audit? Or,
no.
I'm sorry, I caught that wrong. I just heard audit somewhere.
Oh, I didn't say anything about audit.
I garbled it entirely then. Is that the only piece we're waiting? Sorry, I just set off alarm bells among my charter school friends.
Charter school board, the charter school carry forward will go to the state charter school board for approval
next week.
And then come back.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. It's just that. Gotcha. Thank you. Okay. Well, in terms of managing time, I mean, it sounds like at the end of this, you're looking for if the committee is inclined to approve these carry forward plans and make a recommendation to the board, unless we have specific questions or concerns. I don't know if members wanted to walk through one department in particular and focus on that. We've got about half an hour if there are questions or concerns. Or Scott, were you planning to go through each one of those? What's the best way to kind of just work through this and get to the end game?
Yeah, so we've done the process before as we put these in front of the finance committee members, and then to what you just articulated, if they have specific questions or concerns with any one of the spend plans that are in front of them, we defer to you for that. We don't take time to go through them one by one. I mean, we start at the top, obviously, as the example one, but it seems to have worked well in the past just to do it by exception. The exception being if you and or members of the finance committee have questions for myself, Assistant Superintendent Jacobson, or again, the other two assistants are here, as well as section directors or staff that can answer any detailed questions you might have.
Okay, I see hands from Member Hart and Member Norton. I don't know which order again, sorry.
Norton, go ahead.
Okay, I had to get off mute. I did have a question on that charter one. Thanks for that explanation. My other question that I had was in the student support services spend plan. It's well fleshed out. I just don't understand down below in the spend plan detail, their third item, which was $228,000 A2A plus community-based school improvement. If I could just get somebody to walk through that information and explain what was going on there.
So I think Assistant Superintendent Voorhees is on. Is that, I mean, if you call on her first, she might say no and reply to somebody else, but she can probably answer that.
Are you with us, Leah?
And Chair Moss, would you like me to respond?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Member Norton. So you may remember, but it's a little complicated, so you may not, that last year the legislature moved the $7 million that they give us annually for state turnaround to be able to support schools who are identified for turnaround. They moved that money into an A2A plus program because we were not identifying schools for turnaround because of COVID and the lack of assessment data. So they let us keep the money, but they moved the money into a program that we already have, the A2A program. So they added this 3-year A2A plus program for schools who needed support, but since we weren't identifying them, so just a short-term version of A2A plus. This happened very quickly during the legislative session, and Assistant Superintendent Nielsen and I and Tracy Van Deventer and lots of other staff worked on making this happen. As we have been implementing, beginning to implement the A2A plus 3-year plan, we have recognized that it would be a whole lot simpler to implement this 3-year program if we were able to have support from a data analyst to help these schools really look at their data and do root cause analyses and comprehensive needs assessment and school improvement plans based on that data. And we had, in the A2A plus plan, we had enough money to be able to put $50,000 a year of those funds that the legislature moved over into data analyst. But this would give us the ability to make a full-time position for the 3 years of A2A plus. So those schools and our team here at the USBE can really get the support to really look at school level data and A2A plus program level data to be able to provide some information to all of us about the process and about school improvement and about next steps. So that's what this funding source would do. It would take that $50,000 and increase it enough that we could have a full-time position for the 3 years of the A2A plus program. Does that answer your question, Member Norton?
It certainly does. And I had, faith and belief that this was going to be great, but the way it was worded, I just didn't have the history to follow the path of what we were, if we were just moving money around, whatever, but you've explained that perfectly. Thank you.
I apologize. I probably should have added a lot more context into that.
No, this was item. Fine. And your answering was just what I needed. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Leah, before I go to Member Hart, just quickly, is this in the charter board or is this somewhere else?
No, so this is in the student support.
Okay, all right. I got my wires crossed again. I thought Member Norton was asking about something in the charter proposal. So, Member Hart.
I just noticed on student support services 0664 state underage drinking. It's gonna it's legislative. I didn't read that carefully. I just wondered about the time. This is one where I saw an RFP would be released. And I just was concerned that that's going to take quite a bit of time. And does that pose a problem? But I see that it's legislative correctly marked, so that's not probably going to get swept or anything. That's just moving forward with the plan, correct?
Chair, can I respond?
Yes, please.
Yes, exactly. So as Deputy Superintendent Jones outlined, so these funds are restricted to this purpose.
Okay.
So we just need to put out a new RFP. The funds will then become encumbered and we'll be able to use them over multiple years. So
Okay.
they've already been outlined for this purpose. We just haven't moved to the point of being able to get the contract in place to then spend them.
Right. It's a timeline issue then.
Exactly.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from board members? Well, I can make a motion then, if there's no need for further discussion. Of course, we can discuss it after the motion, but I'll make a motion that the committee approve the carry forward balance amounts and proposals for their use that have been presented to Finance Committee. Recommend that to the board for second and final reading. I think we've discussed it. So any discussion?
I've got a question, but I can't get my hand raised. Sorry.
Oh, there you go, Chair.
Hey, sorry. So, but is anything going to change between now and our board meeting on spend plans at all on it? And well, is there any other proposed incoming information that we're going to see before we vote on this? I want to do this before we move off of this. Will the charter school, how should I just say it? Do you perceive any different changes? So when this motion goes before the board at a committee next month, are we going to be amending this motion?
So Chair Moss, if I may.
Please.
Superintendent Jones. So appreciate that question. So yes, two things that that we called out today was, the SESB plan is subject to their review and approval next week. And then we still owe you the financial operations spend plan, which our plan for that was just to be inclusive of that put it on the main board agenda. So I think where Chair Huntsman's going with this, Chair Moss, is do we need to address those two caveats or conditions, for your motion. And then I'd just like to just pause and double check with Assistant Superintendent Jacobson to make sure that it is just those two conditions or caveats. Approval of the SCSB plan by the SCSB and inclusion or update or bringing forward the financial operations spend plan. Are those the only two? Through
Yes.
Chair Moss, Assistant Superintendent Jacobson, over.
Deborah?
Yes, those are the only two.
I think that's, Chair Moss, I think that's where Chair Huntsman was going with this question.
Right.
Did we answer his question?
Chair?
So, yes, but that's just to help this committee know that
Right.
in the next meeting, there's still just a teeny little bit of, there's some additional work that will be done. That's all I wanted to bring that forward. So thank you.
So does that require an adjusted motion? Do we need to say, do we need to make those two caveats in the motion?
Or if I could maybe respond and ask Scott, or can we move forward, and then if we have to make an amendment to our proposal that we plan to bring to the board, we could bring it up and amend it there? What's the best way procedurally?
So, sir, Chair Moss, I think that's the best way to go. I'm not an expert in Robert's rules, but I think we're fine. I think we're covered there. And then when we get to the board meeting, we can make an amendment as needed.
Okay, I see Member Norton and Chair.
Yeah, that's correct. No, I'm taking my hand. Sorry.
And I just wanted to say I'm extremely grateful to see extra money going into school counselors. And I hope that, and I don't know if, I was a little confused yesterday if the school nurses are fully funded from us or if they do receive a majority of their money from the Department of Health. But I do see that we do have 38,000 more appropriated for them. when you spread that out across the state, that's not very much for each LEA. And so I hope that, that could be a priority in our, it might not be this year funding, but going forth that we can bump that up a little bit because they have direct impact with those individual students. That's all I wanted to say, but yeah, I appreciate the rest of the work that's been done.
All right, thank you. And maybe I can ask a quick question related to the motion just before we close, since we're a little bit early. My understanding is that there was a very low reporting of paying nurses by charters. I understand that may be underreported and that there are some folks who are going to revisit that. I did wonder though, and I think this is germane to that part of the spend plan for nurses. Is anybody aware of coordination for those that are not currently retaining a nurse, whether there's something being done through RESAs or elsewhere to do sort of a cost sharing on nurses? I know some of the RESAs are doing some cool things between charters and small districts on these economies of scale. Do we know if that's being done anywhere for nurses?
So I'm not sure who to defer to on this one. Is there someone from the USBE staff that can answer Chair Moss's question?
If not, I understand it's not technically a finance question. It just relates to the spend plan on that item. But anybody? Member Hutchings.
Just a thought here, because this is something I've dealt with at my charter school. They are very hard to find. We've tried to hire our own school nurse over a long period of time. So we use a service where we just contract as needed to use a trained school nurse. But I would love to have some kind of a shared situation with other schools, because we don't need one full-time. We don't even really need one part-time. But I would love to have a relationship with a consistent school nurse that we can rely on. We've tried and haven't been able to engage one in that way. So I think the Reese's example is a wonderful idea.
Maybe that's something to follow up. I just wanted to raise it here because I went to the URSA conference and heard from the Reese's, and they just do some really cool stuff, especially in that district charter collaboration space that doesn't happen too much outside of those. So, well, thanks. Kristen, did you have a comment?
Yeah, and I was greatly concerned hearing that yesterday as well. To think that we can get a volunteer parent to come in there, that is, a big risk on both sides, I think. And I just, I look at how they do the medical plans, for each elementary school. And, we have one day a week, and she's going full time for just our one elementary school. So I can only imagine what it could be like, in an area that does not have one at all. That is a boatload of work. So yeah, let's keep that on our watch list.
Thanks, Kristen. Assistant Superintendent Voorhees.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have actually talked to two of the Reese's about the possibility. So they do know that they could use House Bill 373 funds for that. I don't know if that actually happened, but I will happily follow up and let you know.
Thank you. All right, any further discussion of the motion, or we got a little sidetracked, but I think it's germane enough for committee work that we answered those questions. So thank you. Any other discussion or questions on the motion? Okay, the motion is then that we approve on first reading and make recommendations to the USBE on second and final reading to approve the carry forward balances, amounts, and proposals as presented today to Finance Committee. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? No. That motion passes unanimously. Okay, well, I'll defer to Chair or to Scott. Anybody else? Any further business, or are we okay to wrap it up?
I think we've covered it all.
It's all that's on our agenda.
Yeah. So that kind of does it. All right. Well, thank you all very much.
Hey,
can I make reports.
Can I make a question, or can I ask a comment?
Please.
The discussion for requests for data and information, I wanted to request data and information in a follow-up meeting or, our next month's meeting. If we can keep updated in our department, especially on the financial impacts from the for-profit SEOPs, kind of keeping up on how many students, et cetera. And so we can see, we're going to have to hire more people. Are we going to have to set aside funding? What kind of funding we can expect coming in? Those types of questions.
Anyone?
So, yes, sir, we can capture that and then we'll make it a follow-up to the agenda item that Board Member Norton, to the Finance Committee agenda item for data and information follow-up. So we'll follow up first thing in our October finance meeting.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Any other requests or comments? All right, thanks very much, everybody.
We'll
Have a great
see you guys
weekend.
in a few out or at 1.
Yes,
bet.
okay. see
You
y'all.
bet.
Thanks,
Thanks.
everybody.
Thanks.